Thank you, Dr. Wadsworth. So now we open the Q&A session. So is there any question? Yeah, please.
Yes. How many direct employees do you have, and who are you answerable to?
Oh, great question. I thought when I became CEO and president, I would run out of bosses. But it turns out, no, they proliferated. So I'm accountable to a board of directors, 9 people. I'm accountable to various customers, Department of Energy, Department of Defense. Both senators like to think they have something to say. The governor of the state does. So I have lots of bosses. They're not directly bosses, but they all are powerful and can try and direct things. The number of direct employees is a tricky question. If we add up everyone who has a Battelle name on their badge, it's about 22,000. However, the way we contract these different laboratories is in all cases different. So at Oak Ridge National Lab, we created something called a Limited Liability Corporation, and that is jointly run by the University of Tennessee and Battelle. It's called UT Battelle. And those employees wear a badge that says UT Battelle. So it's got our name on it, but there's a management layer. So I sit on that board and chair it, but there's a legal entity between Battelle and those employees. So they're all a little bit different. In Columbus, there's about 3,500 people. But it turns out at Pacific Northwest, they're all direct employees of Battelle, unlike the other labs. So it's complicated. But there's about 22,000 people and about $6 billion. So under US accounting law, I have to roll up about $6 billion a year in our annual statement.
Okay. Professor Wang?
Thank you, Dr. Wadsworth, for pointing out some of the future challenges. And you indicated that it's going to be dictated by population growth, and also along with that, there'll be mega cities. So I suppose in these mega cities where population becomes much denser, we'll have even greater challenges in energy, environment, and food and so on. But how do you predict and identify these mega cities?
Yeah.
Is there any way to, but now you say there are 20 and in the future it's going to grow into 40.
Yeah. So yeah, the answer is, population growth is one lens. There are other ways to think about it. I just like thinking about that one because it's predictable. Because to develop a strategy, you have to start with some assumptions. Otherwise, you flounder. So if I think about population growth, then I can think about the impact. You can measure the rate of growth of cities pretty easily. So you know now which cities are at 10 million, going to 12, going to 14, going. So you can start to predict where they're going to be and how big they're going to be. And as I said, there's an interesting sociological thing where you can be too big and people stop wanting to go to that city. Maybe it's too expensive. Maybe it's too hard to get around. Lots of reasons. Maybe the water's very difficult to control. So there are some limiting factors on how big they'll become. But it's one way to absorb all that population growth. But from that, you can derive a transportation future. You can start thinking about, what does that mean? Should I be working on, railway systems or automated vehicles? Or you can start anticipating and then try, from a university perspective, try and draw out a common technical problem that will be applicable to many different potential areas. So neuroscience, I think is a great field to get into because the understanding of the brain has progressed significantly, and there's huge amounts of money going into understanding neuroscience. And it's very interesting. So when I tour the hospital with a brain surgeon, it's quite different. I leave it feeling differently than I entered because he thinks about everything that goes wrong with you as being coming from the brain. So he doesn't think about kidney diseases. He says, what in the brain causes a kidney disease? And so it's a different way of thinking about it. And there's a lot of money going into neuroscience. So people are living longer because food's better. People don't sit out in the sun so much and get cancer. There's all sorts of reasons why people are living longer. So their bodies are living longer, but their brains are having to deal with much longer lifespans. So you're seeing a huge increase in diseases like Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is now the 4th leading cause of death in the United States. People didn't used to think about it that much. So as people get older, and the prediction is that each generation will live 10 years longer than the last. So there's a lot more people reaching 100. I mean, it's quite interesting to map it. And what that brings with it is tremendous challenges in healthcare. Because if you think about retirement at 60, 65, and you're going to live to 100, you've got 35 years of problems and no income. And you're all paying for it. So there are some really interesting challenges, financially, economically, socially. But again, underneath it all is how do you make healthcare more affordable? And that's a technical problem. And so I think biomedicine is a terrific place to be. But I'm a big fan of all engineering because it's not going away. Civil engineering is going to be revolutionized with global climate warming. I mean, start worrying about cities that are going to be 1 foot underwater and you've got a whole new civil engineering course. So I think all engineering is important. New branches of it are developing. And so I'm passionate about that. But I think it applies in very interesting ways to medicine and the human body as well as structures.
Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Wadsworth. Thanks for your talk. Matt, as you mentioned, some of the national labs, like Lawrence Berkeley and Los Alamos, was run by university.
Yes.
So could you please comment and compare the national labs run by university or run by the company like Battle and Lockheed Martin?
Yes. I don't know why you asked that question, but it's very high on my mind. Okay, it's a great question. Universities are different than Battelle. Battelle's different than a for-profit, bottom line, Lockheed Martin. And yet all of the 3 groups run national labs. Who's best? Battelle. Okay, so the University of California was brought into the Manhattan Project in World War II at Los Alamos because there was a General Groves was running the nuclear weapons program to develop Little Boy and Fat Man. And he was a general. He had uniforms and medals. And he thought the scientists should all wear ties and suits and show up at 7:30 in the morning and work till 6 o'clock at night. And he was quite adamant about this. And it was quickly realized that was a very bad idea with people like Edward Teller and so on. So Oppenheimer was brought in from the University of California to run the science part of nuclear weapons. And Groves was there to do the operations, material supply, and all that stuff. And that led to this concept of a government-owned, contractor-operated. And it's uniquely American. The contractors, after World War II, they looked around for entities that were good at running big stuff that didn't want a lot of money. They do it for national pride. So people like Union Carbide and others said, we'll do it for $1. And they'd take the dollar every year and frame it. And they'd pay for everything out of their own profits because they were helping the country. It was a very proud time after World War II to help the United States. After a few years, they started wondering where the money was and stopped doing it. And universities started more and more, like Chicago runs Argonne, and other universities got involved. And industry was sort of on the sideline, really. And then Battelle looks like an interesting place to the government because, hey, we're non-profit. And we do a lot of science and technology and interesting stuff, so they kind of liked us. And then something very, very interesting happened about 14 years ago. 14 years ago, there were huge scandals at Los Alamos. There was a Wen-Ho Lee spy case, which wasn't really a spy case. And there's a bunch of other things went wrong. So the government said, you guys in the University of California are great at science, but you don't know anything about operating a lab. So we're going to compete this contract, and you've got to team with an industry. So the fee for running Los Alamos is about $15 million a year. And when the University of California tried to attract a company, Lockheed, Bechtel, they said, forget it, that's not enough money. So they kept upping the fee until eventually somebody said, yeah, we'll try. And that fee was $65 million. They went from 15 to 65. And now you had to create a company that paid taxes because they were for profit. So the impact on a $1.2 billion lab revenue was about 200 million. So you thought you had 1.2 billion, and when the for-profit contractors came in, it went to 1 billion. So a very unpopular move in the lab staff. The government said, well, too bad. We're going to clean up the operations. So 14 years on, the operations aren't any better. So Los Alamos is going to be competed again. Sandia is being competed right now. They were run by Lockheed Martin. So the government said, hey, we thought if we gave you all this extra money, there wouldn't be any accidents, there wouldn't be any screw-ups. But it's no better than it was before. Why are we paying all this money? So it's broken open another discussion, which we're very happy to be part of. So that's, sorry for the long answer, but it's a very intriguing question.
Thank you.
It's a very intriguing question. Yes, sir.
Do you have activities that are more specifically related to artificial intelligence?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. And we're very interested in applying artificial intelligence to autonomy of vehicles. Yeah, so we've had different programs in artificial intelligence. Some of them are military. So a lot of our work sometimes we get paid by the government for national security purposes, and then we take those findings and find commercial uses. Once in a blue moon, we do something for a commercial client that has military applications, but not very often. So a lot of our AI work is on the military side. Yes, sir.
Thanks for this great talk. You said that carbon capture and storage
Yes.
was an economical and political issue now. So does it mean that all the technical problems, like storing it underground, etc., is it all solved?
Okay, so here's the story. We were asked to sequester carbon from a coal-fired plant run by American Electric Power, AEP. And their power plant was in West Virginia, a place called Belhaven. And so we have a bunch of geologists. So they figured out that there was an ideal place about 2 miles underground with interconnected porosity where you could pump the carbon dioxide. And when it gets down to that depth and temperature, it becomes a viscous fluid. And you could put it into this porosity and it would stay there. There's no driver for it to do anything else. We spent quite a lot of money working with AEP, and the local people called it the well to hell. It was a well. Not very interesting. I visited it. There was a hole in the ground, this big, and pipes going in. And we took half the effluent from a real coal plant, stripped the CO2 out of it, and buried it safely. So far, so good. So AEP said, we're on board with all of this. Costs money. So we need to add the cost of this money to the ratepayers' bills. And there's a bureaucracy in the Midwest called PUCO, P-U-C-O, and they said, no, we don't want you to do that. Why? Well, we don't want the heat from having bills go up. But it costs money to produce clean energy. They wouldn't take the political risk. So the money from the Department of Energy that had paid us came to a stop. So it was technologically solved. So then we went to Western Ohio to do another one. And it was on farmland in this case. And a bunch of radical people had got to the farmers and told them it was a bad idea because one day the earth would burp and all this CO2 would come up and kill them. So there were massive protests against doing it there. I think it eventually went to Michigan. And around about that time, fracking became popular. And the same people who were good at sequestration were good at fracking, understanding the geology for fracking. So they just moved over to there. So it's a technology that sits on the shelf. If you understand the geology, you can bury carbon very safely. It's a solved problem. It's a political, sociological, economic problem, not a technical one, in my opinion. Yes? Oh, sorry.